Hello everyone, my name is Elaine and I'm a functional consultant here at Sikich. Today we're going to review the BI360 Report Designer. The BI360 Report Designer is a tool that is actually input into your Excel. So you'll notice here that I am in our regular Excel application here, but now I have this new BI360 Reporting tab. So we have a few options here. The first one is New Blank. This is going to start a new BI360 report, which is going to look a lot like this, just a blank template here. New Current would be if I already had some text on this field here. Let's say I have test, and now I want to make this report into a BI360 report. I could use all the text that I have here, and then just click New Current, and it would launch all of our tools here for BI360. Upload Report will either upload this report into your one-stop reporting portal if you have the on-prem version, or it will save your report in draft mode if you own the cloud version. The next option we have here is our report configuration. This is just going to show us our integration setup here. So it'll give us our data connection, which ours is our Sikich corporate demo, and then our company, which is our data warehouse. Sometimes you'll see that you'll have multiple companies in here, but if you have purchased the data warehouse, then that is likely what you will see for your company selection in most cases. Next, we have our report properties. Our report properties are going to be, again, pretty standard items here. We have the name of the report, which I called Trial Balance Sample. Then I have myself as the author, and then when I created this report. You also have the option to password protect this workbook in case you have sensitive information in here. And we also have this budgeting tab, which is pertaining to the budgeting module inside BI360 in case we want to protect any cells here, if we want to allow different line item details, or if we want to force a refresh when opening the report inside the portal. Next we have our options here. So our first option here is always open Report Designer in run mode. This is referring to our Report Designer here on the left. You'll see there's a Design tab and a Run tab. When I go to the Run tab, this is when I'm going to run my report and get my different results there. Or I can open Excel in this Designer tab. So this is just a personal preference of if you want to open your new report and then run it real quick just to see what the results are, or if you prefer to open your reports here in the Design tab. Insert field title above cell drop. This is referring to when you come into your BI360 Report Designer here, we have a bunch of different fields here that we can drop onto our template. And you'll notice if I have this option checked here, it'll take a second to refresh there, that when I come in here and I click and drag any of these values onto my template, it creates this title above my value here. So again, this is just personal preference. If you want to always have those headers come in with your dimensions here, again, that is just up to you. As you get further into your reporting, you may find that it's not always convenient to have those there. So that's just personal preference. Okay, tool tips and modules. Those are just tool tips from Solver that are just kind of little help tips. And then this create group dialog. This is again referring to that pop-up window. When I first dragged that value on here, you'll notice that when I bring a new dimension here from my Report Designer onto my template, I get this prompt here. This is asking if I want to create a new selection group on the row, on the column, or if I don't want to create a selection group. The selection group basically means that this value will impact this entire row or this entire column, depending on how I want this category value to impact my report. I may just want to have this value in this one B20 cell, in which case I would click Do Not Create a Selection Group. Now this option here is asking if we want to get that prompt only when bringing this value onto a new row or a new column, or do we always want to get the prompt, or do we never want to get that prompt and we only want those grouping options to occur when we manually create them. I like to keep it at conditionally since that makes the most sense to me. Let's see, we have our language down here. This is just asking for what language you prefer. Your Windows default is probably what's going to work best for you. And then this is just some general application setup here. We have our portal, which is going to be the same for everyone on the cloud BI360 version. And then if you want to always have it sign in automatically, having it autocorrect, and then it just shows who it's licensed to. And then down here we have an about window where you can actually check your one-stop reporting version here, your solver version. This might just be helpful if you ever need to submit support requests to Solver. They may ask for your version, so that's where you can grab that from. Okay, so those are our setup or configuration of BI360 options. These next 4 or 5 icons that we have here, these are pertaining to our actual report design. So you'll notice that we have 2 new items here for BI360 that are not native to Excel, which is our report designer and our layout editor here. Now we have 2 different ways to open and close these. We can either close them out here, just in these little X's, or I can come in here and just highlight them in my toolbar up ahead. So just personal preferences on how you guys want to access these. Sometimes it can get a little annoying if your layout editor is covering your report. You can just close out of that. You're not going to lose that window. So the next item we have over here are our layout comments. And let's see if we can get some layout comments to show here. Our layout comments are basically like an audit of our BI360 report here. Now none are populating here since I don't have a whole lot on this report, but they're helpful when troubleshooting a report if you're wondering why something isn't working or maybe a filter isn't applying to the whole row or the column like you expect it to. These layout comments will pop up on our screen here, and they will show us that basically in plain text what values and filters we have on our report. So I may say, oh, I put this filter on the cell when I meant to put it on the column. So those are what layout comments are good for, kind of checking your report design. And then lastly, we have these report parameters and auto parameters. A report parameter you can think of as a report filter. So I may have something like a period or an account. And there are 2 ways that we can use these parameters. One is to decide what the filter should be ahead of time, or the parameter should be ahead of time. Maybe I know I always want to have this one company or this one entity. Or maybe I want the users to be able to choose that value at the time that they run this report. So for example, I may say that this report, this entity should always be one company, but maybe I want to have my period be something that can be selected each time I run this report. So I don't want to put the period as January 2020, since I'll have to keep updating that within the report design then every time I want to run it for periods outside of January 2020. Now, you'll notice here that when I clicked and dragged entity onto our report parameter window here, it is prompting us to create a new report parameter in this wizard. This occurred because we don't have auto parameter selected. If we had auto parameter selected and then we were to use these values as a parameter, we would not need to go through this wizard. That's what auto parameters means. So let's go ahead and create this entity parameter. You ask for a name here and then a prompt. And the prompt can be changed later on, but the name cannot. That becomes something that is static after creating this parameter. So we'll go ahead and click next. And we have a couple options here. These are just for how you want to view this particular filter. This is the default, this lookup edit one, which is nice, since things like this edit one require that you manually type in whatever value you're looking for. So this can sometimes lead to misspelling, and it won't be maybe as useful. So that's why I always like to stay with this lookup edit version. You can, however, choose a drop down, a checklist, or even using a tree for other reports. Then we have this default value. So this default value would be if we if we wanted to have this parameter available when running the report, but we wanted to autofill what it would run it as. So let's go ahead and look at our options here. Okay, so I have a few companies here that are available to me in our Sikich demo environment, but I know that I always want to run these reports for corporate US. Making this a default does not make this report only able to run with this value. It just means that when I go ahead and I run this report, that'll already be populated for me. Your lookup filter means that you're changing the range of options when your users run your report. So you saw all of the options that I just had when I looked at my default value. What I can do is say, I don't want my users to see any of these when they go to run whatever entity they need. I want them to just choose from these four here. So these are going to be my four options that will be available when running this report. Then I can make this option hidden. So the users that run these reports will not see this parameter. It'll just be built into the report already. Allow empty, this means that I can run this report without having this option filled out. Allowed multi-selection means that I can run this report using multiple entities. And then creating sheet per value, that means that I can run this report and I can have one sheet for each of those entities. So one sheet for the US, one sheet for Asia, and so on. Let's go ahead and finish this parameter now. Great, so now we have our entity parameter all set up here. If I ever wanted to go in there and change some of those settings that we created, I would just come in here and click this little paper button here, and then I can go through this wizard again and make those changes as needed. If I ever wanted to remove this parameter from the report, I would just need to come in here and click this red X, and that deletes this parameter. And I'll say yes. Okay. The last button we have here is just a help button, and this actually launches a browser out to the BI360 website, and it just kind of gives you a little bit more information about the report designer from Solver. All right, so onto the main object here, which is our report designer. You'll notice that we had our report designer and our layout editor. These are probably going to be the two main items that you will spend most of your time in when building out BI360 reports. I like to think of it as if our report designer contains all of our values, and we'll bring our values either onto our Excel report here, or we'll bring them onto our layout editor here, which will act as filters onto our report. So in our report designer here, I can see my user and I can see I'm connected to the data warehouse. And then, as I mentioned previously, we have our design tab and we have our run tab. Our run tab is going to be where we go before running this report here. So if I click run, it gives me the account that I dragged on here and also a category value. I'll go ahead and go back to our design mode. And as we looked over here, you can see that I pulled some values from this report designer onto our template earlier. What we have here are these blue boxes are actually going to be all of the modules that we have configured in our data warehouse. And these can be anything from your ERP system, or they can be something like Google Analytics, or maybe some Salesforce data. So whatever modules you have set up in your data warehouse will show here with these blue box icons. Then down here we have some native Solver functions that are always going to be a part of our report designer. We have our period functions, which you'll notice here. These refer to a timeline. So in BI360, we basically only have one amount value to drag onto our reports, and then we can change what that value outputs based on these different period functions that we put on top of it. So maybe I want to see year to date, or I want to see 12 months rolling. I can change what the value is by adding a period function to the amount. Next, we have our trees. These are trees that have been set up inside the data warehouse, and these can be from my division trees or maybe my account trees. And you can use them both as filters or as values on your actual report. Next, we have our expressions, and expressions are filters that you have previously created. So maybe I want to have a filter that stipulates both which company I want to use and also which accounts I want to use. It can become a bit cumbersome or tedious to always add those two filters if I know that I always need them. So I can create one expression here that combines both filters, and then I can just use that one expression whenever I need a combination of those filters. Next, we have our KPIs. And your KPI is going to be a numeric or a dollar value in most cases, and it's going to reference your different expressions that you've established in the previous module, but you can create amounts and use these KPIs on your report. So maybe I'll create an expression to show my revenue accounts and then another expression to show my expense accounts. And then I can create a KPI here that subtracts my expenses from my revenue accounts, and I can drag that value onto my report so I always see that net revenue, that net profit. So again, just saving time and making your reports a bit more efficient when you go through your report design. Next, we have our drill to definitions. Your drill to is going to be when you run your reports, you can drill into your data and you can modify which columns you see in that drill to. So you can create those custom drill tos here. Next, we have our report parameters. This section here is the same as the report parameters window that we have here. So in BI360, you'll notice that there are often more than one way to get to the same location, and this is one of those examples. And those are all of the different modules that we have here inside our report designer. We can move around some of these items if we want to. Maybe we want to have our period functions all the way at the top, or maybe we don't really ever use this strategy module. We can actually remove some of these modules from our view here. I can take off the strategy one if I know that I never need it. This is specific to each user. It's not going to impact other users. So again, just making your interface a bit more personal to you and whatever makes the most sense for your workstation here. You may have noticed that when I needed to see more of these icons, I was able to click and drag this gray bar here, and as I did so, the icons populated beneath at the bottom here. So there are some different visibility options as far as what you need to have while you're building these reports. So right now I'm back into my general ledger module, and you can see that there's a bit of a hierarchy here. I have my general ledger, and then I have my dimension values, and then down here I have my numeric values. They kind of have a coin icon, and those are what I'll use for my dollar amounts in my reports. So this high level here, this is the module. This green plus button here, this is the dimension. And then these values here, such as account description, account category, these are my dimension attributes. So those are the different levels that you have within each of your dimensions and each of your modules. And usually when you have an implementation with Solver, they have some core values that are brought over, things like accounts, categories, departments, entities. However, you can have unique values when doing your implementation if you know that there are dimensions that are outside of these core values here that you know you will need. So maybe something like division or employee ID, you can add all of those in your integration beforehand. Okay. Then the next thing we'll take a look at here is our layout editor, this floating window that we have here. Our layout editor is where we can decide that we want to have filters, and we can have them impact our rows, our columns, just the cells, or the sheet as a whole. So let's take a look here, and if I click on this sheet, you'll see that that entity that we created earlier landed here on our sheet filters. This whole sheet is highlighted because I'm on our sheet filters on this button here. So our sheet filters are going to impact the whole sheet, but we also can have filters that impact only the row or the column. And our sheet filters actually have the lowest priority here. So I can put a filter on this whole sheet, but if I put a filter that's different from that on our column, our report's going to know to take that one since our columns have a higher priority. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just build a sample trial balance here so you guys can see this report in action. So I'll go ahead and I'll give our report a name. And one thing that I like to do is I actually highlight these cells, or excuse me, these columns and these rows in case I want to put any values in them, just so I can see the outline of my report, and then when I need to run the report, I'll just go ahead and I'll hide those rows and columns. So not a requirement, but just something that I find helpful for me when building my reports here. And you'll notice that I'm using regular Excel functionality here. BI360 completely integrates with Microsoft Excel, so any formulas, any formatting or modifications you want to make using Excel, that is all fair game when building your BI360 reports here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to bring out my account. So I'm going to click and drag account onto a row. And then it prompts me if I want to create a selection group on the row, the column, or none at all. I want it to be on the row, so I want these accounts to affect the entire row. And now it's highlighted, and I've created a little grouping here on my layout editor. This is where I can select which accounts I want to populate in my trial balance here. So I'm going to go into this lookup, and I'm going to say I want the accounts to pull from, let's see, up until my 9,000. There we go. So those are the accounts that I want to pull into my trial balance. And you'll see that there is a little green plus sign in here. This is referring to the expanding checkbox that we have over here. So the goal in this would be that I would have all of my accounts show up down here instead of just that first account showing up. So let's go ahead and run this and see what it looks like. Okay, great. So I am seeing all of my accounts here as expected. So let's go back to our design tab. One thing to note is when doing any kind of formatting, we need to be in the design tab, both to do that formatting and also to save our report. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my grouping. Notice that I'm clicking on the grouping or on the row, and I'm not clicking in our cell. If I were to add any extra filters in here, it would only impact B7, this cell here, and I don't want that. I want any edits that I make to impact the entire row of my account details. So next, I'm going to bring over my account description here, and I'll go ahead and I'll give that some space. And then I want to have my amount next to this. So I'm going to use our monthly amount here. Okay. And I'm going to make this have a comma separation, and I'm going to change it so it doesn't say monthly amount since I don't think that's going to be very intuitive. I'm just going to have it say amount. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and run this report once more. All right, so now we can see all of our accounts, our account descriptions, and the amounts tied to those accounts. So what I need to add here next is going to be a period and some other filters here. So let's see, I'm going to actually highlight this whole sheet. Okay, I don't have any filters on this sheet, so I want to add a few of them here. The first one's going to be my period, because we're going to probably want to run this report for a particular period and not just as a whole. So I can choose a report period here, but I don't want to do that because then that report is only going to run for said period. Instead, I'm going to create a parameter so that when I run this report, I can choose which period I want at the time. And I'm going to leave these items empty, but I am going to check allow empty and allow multi-selection. Then I'll go ahead and click finish, and you'll see that there's a period parameter here to select from, and this is what the parameter looks like. There's now an @ symbol in front of it. And I'll click OK. Next, I want to add an entity, and I'll choose from my selection here. I only want to look at corporate US for this one. And what else do I want to add here? For category, I'm going to add category here. And we have a couple options here. Typically, I'm going to go with this main transactions. This means the main GL transactions. Your categories here will change depending on your particular environment. Okay, and for my scenario, I'm going to also add that onto my sheet filters here. I want to look at my actuals instead of any budget or forecasting data. So we're just looking at our actuals. Okay. Then the next thing I think I'm going to want to see, make that bold there, is I think I'm going to want to see whatever that sum is here, or total here. And we have two different options for how we want to see that total. We can do the regular Excel functionality there, and I can do an equals sum. The only thing to note is when you do use those Excel functions, you need to leave a blank row in between them. So if I were to do that sum, I would need to leave this row here, and then I would just need to include both of those cells like that. Or my other option would be to use our one-stop reporting functionality. I could click into this cell right here, right-click on it, go down to one-stop reporting, and it's suggesting that I create a sum for cell D7, which is exactly what I want to do. You'll notice for those one-stop reporting sums, I did not need to include an extra row here. Those are just for our Excel formulas. All right, so I will make this into a dollar value, and then I'll give it a little title here. I'll say total. And I'm doing a little bit of formatting here just to clean it up, make it look more like a report here for us. Okay, and let's go ahead and run this now. And I'll choose a period. I can either type it directly in here, or I can choose from our lookup. I'll go ahead and choose 2020-01. And we'll go ahead and run this. Okay. So let's go to the head and the bottom, and we see perfect. We're at 0. That's what we wanted. And then I could rerun this report again and again for the differing periods if I wanted to. So let's add a couple other items here. Maybe I want to have our description of which entity I'm running this for. So I'll go ahead and I will drag this underneath our trial balance title here. But I don't want to create a selection group on the row or the column since I'm just going to have the description in cell B3 here. So I'm going to click do not create a selection group. Okay. The next thing I could do would be to add some period functions on top of our amount here. So what I'm going to do first is show you the this year all functionality, which is going to show a trending balance across our different months here. So I'll need to go down my period functions here. This list is alphabetical, so it's going to be towards the bottom. Okay, great. And I'll grab it from here. And now I'm going to put it in cell D1. And you'll notice that it created another grouping here on my D column. So this period function is now going to impact any values that I have here in my D column. I put it here in my highlighted row so that when the time comes, I can just right-click this row and hide it as needed. But for now, I want to keep it here just so that if I ever need to review this template, I can see what values I have in here. So now I've come in here and you'll notice that there's not a green a green plus button here. And I do want this cell to repeat out for each month. So I'm going to check that expanding box. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to add a period header so I can see when each of these columns are referring to. So I'll go ahead and I'll go under my period function here, and I'm going to click on period end, and then I'm going to actually put that over our amount, and I'm going to delete this extra header here. Ooh, if it lets me, there we go. And then I'm going to modify what that date looks like because it's still going to be just like regular Excel. I'm going to come in here and I think this will look the nicest. Okay, so now we should see our 12 different columns repeating out with our monthly header there. Let's go ahead and try that now. And it saves the period that I last ran it for. That's okay. I'll go ahead and run it like that. Perfect. So now I'm getting a 12-month analysis of all of my accounts and the values for that month. And that's exactly what we wanted, is we wanted it to show all of those columns spread out here. Perfect. Okay, you'll also notice here that we have our entity description in the upper left-hand corner, so I know that when I run this report, which entity I'm looking at here. Now let's go back here and let's try a different period function for this. I'm going to collapse this and go back to our period functions. And this time, maybe I don't want to see a trending analysis. Maybe I want to see year-to-date and last year-to-date. What I can do is I can come in here and I can click and drag this period function over the existing one here. And then let's go back into our grouping here. And into our filters tab, you'll see that there are 3 different tabs here on our layout editor. We want this filters tab. And it's changed what that function is. It no longer says this period all. Now it's referencing this year-to-date function that I've pasted into that cell. You can also change the values here from this drop-down when using version 5. The next thing I want to change is I want to uncheck this expanding because I don't actually want to see year-to-date 12 different times. I only want to see it the one time for whatever period I run it for. So let's go ahead and run this report once more, now using that year-to-date function. Okay, perfect. So now we're seeing our year-to-date here for just that one January 2020 month, which is good. Now let's say maybe I want to see a variance between this year-to-date and last year-to-date. I'm going to change this date here so we can get the years in there, like so. And then instead of having to rebuild everything that we've put in this report right here in these cells, I'm just going to copy and paste column D into column E. And then I'm going to go into this grouping that was created when we pasted it, and I'm going to change this to be last year-to-date. There it is, last year-to-date. And let's go ahead and run this now. Let's see. And you'll see it didn't change here in the cell. It's still going to run this as last year-to-date, but this might not make sense anymore for me, so I'm just going to paste this over here as well, just so I know when looking at my report layout here what these values should be. And it still says last year-to-date. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, perfect. So now we're seeing our values for 2020 and January of 2019. So this is just a great way to see a quick comparison here. And the last thing I'll do is I'm going to create a variance column. since I think that that will be the most helpful to see how we did between each of our years. So I'm just going to add a quick title here. And then for our function here, what's going to happen a lot of the time with BI360 formulas inside Excel is we're going to get that pound value sign inside our cells. Unlike Excel, where you can actually get a value here, that's okay in Solver if you get that. If I were to do different calculations here, let's see if I get it when I do this. So if I were to run this, I would probably still get a value here, unlike what you're accustomed to with regular Excel functionality. That would be okay to run a report like this, but in case you don't like seeing that, what we can do is use this if-error formula and then still do our regular formula and then just add a 0 there. So it looks a little bit cleaner when we see it. We're not going to be as concerned about that value sign. And then I'm going to add our regular formatting here. And I'm just going to click and drag this sum out here, which it worked here. So now it's referencing F7 instead of the E7 from the previous column, which is what we want to. Sometimes you have to double check whenever you're copying and pasting columns or some of these cells. 90% of the time, it'll copy those functions for you just fine, but sometimes it doesn't carry the BI360 portions of it over, so we just got to be cognizant of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this report once more now. And let's see if we can see our variance. And we do. So now we're looking at our trial balance here for our corporate US. We can compare it to this year to date and last year to date, and we can easily see our variance between the 2 years. And that is how we build our BI360 reports here. So this is, again, a simple version of just a trial balance here, but these are how you would utilize our solver components to easily build our financial reports within just a few minutes. Again, my name is Elaine Foley. I'm a consultant here at Sikich. Please feel free to reach out to Sikich if you have any questions using the Solver BI360 tool. Thank you for watching.